Recording. Perfect. So just click your button for allow recording, and we're going to start the presentation now. So perfect. So today we are going to go over how to prepare and navigate aging family members. And we have our amazing partner, Emily Wirowek with Wirowek Law Group, and she'll be going over trusts and wills and really making sure you have everything in order. And then we also have Erin, who is the CEO of a caregiving company called NextGen Caregivers, and she's educating folks on how to be able to make sure that you have everything in place to do it correctly without burnout, because that's one of the biggest things that has happens to caregivers. And a quick introduction of who I am. I'm a real estate agent and a passive income coach for Zen Coast Homes and Zen Coast University. Our passion is on educating people, so that's why we're hosting this webinar. I graduated from USC and bought my first home at the age of 23 years old, and sold over 500 plus homes, and currently own over 200 units across the nation, and build some passive income from that. But my first property that I helped sell was a trust sale, and it's really dear to my heart of being able to help people who have inherited property. They don't know what to do with it, being able to get an appraisal done on the house. And there's a lot of emotions tied to when they go into mom and dad's home. So being able to clear it out. Dave, thank you for referring your good friend Donna as well too. We helped her with that whole situation. And yeah, so just kind of some background it was New Year's Eve. Her dad passed away, and then we were able to come in and renovate the whole house because no one wants to buy and be in grandma's house anymore. So we were able to refreshen up for the new buyer. And then a little bit of history about my investing journey. Like, I really am passionate on real estate and how it can be a tool to be able to help fund for situations. Let's say, like for me, like why I got into this is like if my parents were to get sick or other things, I have my nest egg of my passive income to be able to fund my parents' long-term care, be able to fund their life like as they get a little bit older, because there's so much and rising health cost care. We just want to make sure that they have the best care, that they can live the longest and best life. So this is just some of my first home I bought in 2016. We have over 200 rentals with 40,000 in passive income across different states. That's my retirement plan to help with my parents and my children in the future. And I actually was able to move my parents. They lived in a multiple story home back in New York in the cold, and part of the caregiving is knowing that they're moving into my house, and there's only 4 steps to get into it with a nice handrail. They're on the first level in a home in a bedroom down there. So those are some of the things that we can be unique and talk about if you're looking to explore options on real estate of family members who might be in a multiple story home and want to move into a single level or more comfortable level. And then our team, we cover all around the Bay Area, but we have partners across the country. So happy to introduce you to other agents across the country to help you with guiding. And it's important to have a trusted team with a realtor team, estate team, caregiving team. And we also have CPAs and other partners as well too. And that's Sue's daughter, Brooke, on there too. Perfect. So today we'll go over the aging process, what some of the steps are, how to navigate conversations with aging family, and even your, Erin will talk about even like siblings as well too. And then Emily will dive into the estate planning, Medicaid, and long-term care and the legal aspects of it. And then we'll dive into the Q&As. So if you have questions, put it in the chat and then we'll go over it towards the end. So Emily, if you want to do a quick introduction.
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. My name's Emily Wirowek. I am an estate planning attorney in California, licensed in California. You could not pay me enough to take a bar in another state. So for those of you on the East Coast, exciting. I'll give you some information, but I won't be taking a bar exam over there to help you out. I make sure that my friends, loved ones, clients plan for the expected and the unexpected. It's better to be organized and have some peace of mind knowing that your trusted loved ones will take care of things when, if something happens. And I make sure that we help provide that peace of mind.
Okay. And then Erin with NextGen Caregivers.
Hey guys, I'm so excited to be with you tonight. Like Jennie said, my name is Erin Antroinen. So I am actually the daughter of Sue and Jeff Antroinen. So my caregiving journey actually began in 2012. So my dad was actually diagnosed with cancer at that time, and my mom was still present. My mom was still able to help and take care of him, and I kind of like walked alongside of her as a co-caregiver. Things really shifted though. He beat cancer 6 out of 7 times over a journey of about 8 years. And then in June 2020, he got rushed to the hospital and ended up coming home on hospice. And it just so happened that my mom had been having these signs of dementia and early onset dementia. She was only in her early 60s. I was in my early 30s. And, all of a sudden, the same week that we got my mom's diagnosis of frontal temporal lobe dementia and Parkinson's, my dad was also coming home on hospice. And so not only did we get, I'm going to get emotional. I didn't think I was going to get emotional. But it's just so crazy. Like, you just never know, like, what my dad was, like, so to speak, in remission, and like for that to take a turn, and then for my mom to also have, and we didn't know what that time frame was going to look like. And so not only, so I actually took a step back. I was on my own health journey. I had a black mold infection that I was recovering from at that time. And so at the time I had a business, and I moved in with my parents to be able to help them navigate everything. And so I went from running my own business, running my own life, to moving in with them, navigating everything: falls, emergency visits, managing doctor's appointments, medications, all their legacy stuff, their paperwork, they're managed, helping with onboarding nurses in the home, being able to navigate burnouts and panic attacks, and making the difficult decision to put my mom in 24/7 care because she had escaped one night in the middle of the night. Scariest thing that I ever experienced was a cop knocking on my door asking me, like, who I'm missing in my home. And I'm like, what are you even talking about? Who am I missing in my home? What does that even mean? But my hope today is really that you leave this call prepared. Like, if you are a caregiver, I hope that you leave this call with some hope, because it's a lot to manage the care of somebody else, and someone who's your parent. Everything in our nervous system and in our body says that they're supposed to be the ones taking care of us. And all of a sudden now we're the ones turning around and feeding them and putting, Pampers with them and taking care of them down to their basic needs and keeping their dignity along the way. And if you're not yet to a caregiving season, my hope is that today you'll be able to be prepared and get prepared, because we never know. So next for me. And, one of the, my biggest focuses is really helping to break the stigma around caregiving. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but this month is actually National Caregiver Month, for Family Caregiver Month. And there's 65.7 million unpaid caregivers in the United States. And so what that means is that there's billions of hours that are being had, and billions of people that are doing care for their loved ones and not being paid for it. And so, a lot of times when I first, in my early 30s, was tasked with being a caregiver, one of the things that people always said to me is like, oh, that's so hard. I could never do what you do. And, from there on, it really became my mission to break the stigma that there is life after diagnosis, that there's life not only for your loved one who has some sort of an illness, but there's life for you, whether you have a family, or you have a job, you have a career. One of the biggest things people used to always ask me is like, does your mom know who you are? Because one of her very early onset symptoms were like unable to speak and communicate, and doing all of that. And you know, one thing is that your loved one may or may not be able to say your name, but they know your spirit, they know your heart, and they're there and they know who you are, even if they're not able to articulate that. And so I would love to know in the chat, how many of you are caregivers? Like if you're a caregiver, could you drop a 1 in the chat? Like if you're actively caregiving, and if you're not yet caregiving, could you just drop a 2 for me, just so I kind of know who the audience is that we're working with? And NextGen while they're doing that. Awesome. Thank you. So with that, there's 4 people in this world. There's 4 types of people. So it is with 100% certainty that caregiving will affect your life. 1, you either have been a caregiver. 2, you're currently are a caregiver. 3, you will be a caregiver. Or 4, you're going to need a caregiver. And so this information is so important because it's not a matter of if this is going to touch your life, it's when. Next. And so with that, I wanted to kind of break down some of the processes of aging, just kind of give you some benchmarks, because it looks like most of the people on the call here are not yet caregivers. And so with that, you know, what are the things that we want to pay attention to? I pulled up the chat and I'm clicking all the wrong things. And so what are the things that we want to pay attention to? What are the important things? So 1 is social and lifestyle changes. So as our loved ones age, as our parents age, our aunts and uncles, you know, it's really important to make sure that we understand the social changes that they're going through when they retire. Like isolation can start to set in. And with that, you know, I'll never forget, I was getting my nails done and my nail tech was talking about her mom who like has Parkinson's, and all of a sudden her mom was so clingy to her. She wouldn't want to drive by herself. The only time she would leave the house is if she would go with her daughter. And she was so annoyed. And I was like, can I offer you a reframe for this situation? And she was like, sure. I said, I don't know if you're aware, but once people start aging and things start happening and things start happening in their body they're not aware of, they start to fear leaving the house. They start to fear doing things that they used to do. And so giving them more grace and giving them more time to be able to navigate some of that and having more patience is so important. 2 is preventative health measures. Like this is very, you know, straightforward, but having routine health checkups, you know, making sure that those are the things that we're keeping track of, not only for the person who is aging well, but also the caregiver. You know, and with this, the rest of the page can go in any order. You know, sometimes physical changes happen first, sometimes cognitive, sometimes emotional, sometimes chronic health conditions, or sometimes things can happen suddenly. Like this doesn't have to be a chronological thing, but what I want to encourage you that early detection is the key, and just start paying attention. You know, very early on, we noticed my mom was having aphasia, which is basically an inability to communicate. She was having hard time speaking words. She was saying the same words all the time. She was repeating things back to me. You know, she was hoarding. She was forgetting simple things. The way that she walked all of a sudden was different. So don't negate those small changes in your loved ones that you're seeing, because they could end up meaning big things, you know, because the early detection is the key. And a lot of times, like doctors have to take time before they can put diagnoses together. Like it's not something that can just happen overnight. You know, it's not just a simple blood test. A lot of times they have to do different tests to be able to put things together. So really understanding what those different changes look like. The one thing that I want to point out on this slide is number 7, which is the resilience and the adaptation. You know, a lot of times when we're moving into working with our loved ones who have some sort of an illness, you know, a lot of fear steps in, fear of the unknown, fear of what happens with our loved ones, with their house, with their money. Do they have long-term care insurance? How do I be a caregiver? How do I navigate these things? And what I want to encourage you is to grow from the fear zone where you're uncertain and you're frozen to the growth zone where you're seeking information, you're making moves, you're really growing. And a lot of this is nervous system regulation, but it's also knowing that you can have a good quality life. Like my mom, even though she had dementia and Parkinson's, her quality of life was amazing. And she, you know, a lot of times people outside looking in go, Well, I don't want to live like that. And, the thing is that like she didn't know anything else besides that she was fed, she was loved, that she loved her life. And we made the best of everything that was happening in her life. And, so being able to make sure that you still, like, I will die on this hill, that they are still a person, they're still your mom, they are still in you, they're still inside of themselves, despite whatever is happening. And how can we help them to live a dignified life in the process, right? And so number 8 is end of life decisions. And I know that Emily's going to talk a lot about this today, but making sure that you have those decisions, like I'm so grateful. March before the pandemic hit, something in me said, Erin, you need to sit down and you need to have a conversation with your family. And I'm so glad that I did, because literally we were able to get down on paper how our parents wanted to live, how they wanted to die, what they wanted to have happen even at their funerals. And as a result of knowing all of this and having this on paper, there was no arguments between me and my sister in any of it. And so with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the next. And so this is the first 4 steps that I always take every client through when they're trying to figure out what do they do after a diagnosis, like because it's overwhelming, right? You're like, I don't even know where to begin. And so the first is take a breath. And so I love that Jennie is all about Zen and Zen Coast, and we're all about taking care of ourselves and regulating our nervous system and coming down into a safe place where we're not in fight or flight. The second is the next 3 things are all about getting your care teams in place. The first is your care team. Like, you as the caregiver cannot help other people until you help yourself. The old adage of like, put your oxygen mask on first. And so this is where you're going to start having conversations with your family. One of my clients that I just recently had a call with, she was like, I didn't even think to like enroll people in. I think a lot of times we wait for people to show up. We wait for people to say, hey, I'd love to bring by food, or I'd love to do this, or I'd love to do that. But what if we were proactive in our approach in building a care team for not only you, but for your family members? So pre-decide, like, what type of care do you need? What are your basic needs? I always say we're like a human plant. And so, are you drinking water? Or what type of nutrition? What is your plan for getting in the sun and getting good vitamin D? Like, these are basic needs that under stress that your body needs to be able to handle the stress that you're going through. What type of coach or therapist or mentor do you need to hire in order to cut your learning curve to get the support that you need? It's never too early to have these conversations and to make a plan for yourself. Start thinking to yourself, like, if something happens, who's my care team? Who are my friends? I had friends literally in the middle of the night that if I was having a panic attack, or if I was up with mom all night long and I was having a hard time, I could call them because they were up nursing or doing different things. So the next team is their care team. And so this is where you're going to sit down with your family, with your siblings, and you're going to decide who's going to do what. Now, some of this is logistics, right? Some of this is who lives where, who's going to be the main person. Like for us, I was the main person who was hands-on with my mom. My sister was more emotional support with me. Basically, whatever I said goes, because I was the one that was there all the time. I was just grateful that she was more of my emotional support. But it's really important to engage family and friends, because you don't have to do this by yourself. And I think so often, we just think nobody wants to help, but it's like, we have to make sure that we're asking. And, who are the doctors that you're working with, the nurses, the meal prep, like all of the different things that are going to make your family members' care run. What are those things that you need to put into place? And then the last piece is your legacy team. And so the goal is to hopefully have this team in place before you even need them. But, Emily's going to talk about this tonight. So this is like your realtors, your estate attorneys, your people who are going to help you with your finances, your just making sure you have everything in one place. So your documents, your passwords, your phone, email. Passwords are so, like, I don't know about y'all, but trying to get into a Gmail sometimes, and you forget your password, it's like the end of the world, so think about, like, we still can't get into my parents' phones because we don't have their passwords. So having that is super important. Next, please. And so with that, self-care is not a luxury, it's a necessity. So this is a picture of me from when I actually first embarked on my caregiving journey. My dad passed away and I stepped in to be my mom's full-time caregiver. And she was in the phase where she was a runner, like all night long, up and down, all over the place. I couldn't keep her dressed. I couldn't keep her, just all the things. And I was trying to do it all on my own. I wasn't getting any sleep. Next thing you know, I landed in the hospital with all the signs of having a heart attack. And it was in that moment that I knew that like I couldn't do this by myself. The teams that I just talked about, those teams happened as a result of this moment right here. Like I said, it ended up being a panic attack, but what I realized is that up until this point, I thought of self-care as massages and nail appointments and weekend trips with friends and family, but really it's navigating and moving stress out of the body. It's understanding that big T trauma is these big events that happen, but little T trauma is these like death by 1,000 cuts, like these things that keep happening over and over again. Like, my mom escaping, my mom who used to be able to feed herself, now all of a sudden she can't feed herself. My dad who, there's we're going to just keep it PG for this webinar, but there's lots of stories that I could tell. But it's the drinking water and understanding nervous system regulation and how to move stress out of the body, like having somatic experiences to be able to move stress out of the body. So you're not getting dis-ease, so their diagnosis doesn't become your diagnosis. And so with that, because there's a lot of emotions, right? Releasing anger, sadness, frustration, learning how to hold both grief and joy, because both can be true at the same time. And so I have 3 questions for you. And so with that, next, please. I want to ask you, what can you do now to prepare? You're going to ask yourself, sorry, what can I do now to prepare? And then how will I focus? And then what do I want my caregiving experience to be? And these are 3 questions that you can ask yourself now. Like, you don't have to be in caregiving yet. Like, what do you need to do to prepare? Is it getting your legal documents in order? Is it setting a plan? Like, if something does happen, how are you going to take care of yourself? What's going to be the plan for your loved one? How do they want to be taken care of? Like Jennie was already talking about her family. Like, sounds like they have some care plans in place. What are the things you need to do to focus? And then how do I want my caregiving experience to be like? Like, pre-decide that before those things happen. So that way you can go into that experience already kind of prepared, because just know that crap's going to hit the wall. Like, it's not a matter of if, it's literally going to happen in caregiving. And then you have to figure out how to pick up the pieces and then figure out how to run the systems and put the processes in place to support you on your caregiving journey. And so next, please. And so with this, this is the framework that I go through with my clients. And I just wanted to give you guys, this is a great slide. I think you guys are going to get a copy of this slide deck, but this is just a really great overview of things that you want to be aware of and to put into place and think through as you're thinking about caregiving. And so first with logistics is your care plan. I had a whole binder that had the care plan for my mom and for my dad. So it was like their medications, what they needed to do, everything in this binder. So it was very simple. Anytime I onboarded a new nurse, everybody knew exactly what they needed to do. Being able to know what you're going to do for housing. Where are they going to stay? Are they going to live in a nursing home, or do you want to be able to have a home and you bring nurses in so you cannot put them in a nursing home? Having activities and routines. Oh my gosh, emergency prep is listen, we get tornadoes here. And there was one time I was with mom and it was the middle of the night and the tornado siren went off. And I will never forget the fear that I had because I had nothing in the basement. Like, I had not thought through what if these things happen. And it was in those moments where, like, I'm so glad nothing happened. But then I prepared an emergency plan. I had a go bag with all of the stuff that they needed. So that way, anytime we emergency went to the hospital, we had everything that we needed. Having those onboarding things, being able to have dignity with care, mindset, creating that resiliency mindset, because with caregiving, it really is we don't know when the season is going to end. Like, my mom was on hospice for 14 months. And like, it was 14 months of wondering, is this going to be the day? And it was just learning how to have those resilient moments and not live in guilt and shame, and, being able to live in the grief, but then also live in my life, because life doesn't stop. And so how do you manage your mindset? And then the last piece is just embodiment. How do you embody the joy that you want to carry, the person you want to be, moving the trauma out of your body so that you can experience joy. Sometimes I meet caregivers that are so beaten down by frustration and anger, and rightfully so, because what they're experiencing isn't fair. And also joy can get to exist here. And so, which is really one of my biggest passions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily so she can give you the legal jargon and all the good things there.
Thank you, Erin. I appreciate it. Everything you've shared is so incredibly important. The legal jargon doesn't have to just be legal jargon. A lot of what I talk to my clients about is, relationships and emotions, and how we're planning for those, things as they're putting together these tools. And I am confident that a couple of things in Erin's, binder and her go bag were these tools for her mom, just so she knew she had them, should something happen. So when you have a loved one that is, at a loss of capacity, whether that's had a traumatic brain injury, or they've got dementia or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, when you get to that point, it's too late. You want to, as Erin said, she had this, a thought that in March, before the pandemic hit, she needed to get these tools and this conversation in place. And she did, before mom and dad lost their capacity. And so getting the legal tools in place is very important, and doing it before your loved ones do not have mental capacity. That's the critical piece. So what do you need as a caregiver that will help with the day-to-day goings on of a person's life? Well, one of those is the power of attorney. In every state across the United States, some call them powers of attorney, some call them powers of attorney for financial management, some call them durable powers of attorney. You could have a limited or specific power of attorney. Generally, I see those for individuals who are, buying a home, selling a home, but they're not going to be local. So they need to appoint someone specifically for that process. And that's generally what the limited or specific powers of attorneys are for. Some attorneys will prepare springing powers of attorney that only become effective when something happens, whether that's, the loss of capacity or a date or something specific happening. In my practice, we have the general durable power of attorney that is in effect when someone signs it, and it doesn't become in effect as far as usefulness until someone loses their capacity. So it's a great tool. That tool makes sure that you can pay their day-to-day bills, pay their taxes, manage their real estate, their digital assets. One of the things Erin mentions that she still hasn't been able to get into mom and dad's phones. Those digital assets, anything with a password or username, it's so important, even for yourself, just to make a list of access, log on, so that way people can get into those things, to get into the email, get into the iCloud, get into the Apple phone, whatever it may be. But the power of attorney will give you all those powers, making, day-to-day decisions on food, medicine, incidentals, dealing with retirement accounts, dealing with Social Security, Medicare, Medi-Cal, whatever the governmental benefits someone's receiving, bank accounts, credit cards. There's a lot of powers that can be put into that power of attorney. And it's important that, you look at yours for yourself and for your loved ones, but then also looking at the person you're caring for and making sure that you have all of those powers that you may need in there, and not just, one or two or three or four. You might not have everything you need. So having those conversations with your loved ones early, even though they might be a little bit uncomfortable, to say, hey, mom, hey, dad, hey, grandma, hey, auntie, do you have a power of attorney in place? And they may not want to let it go. They may not want to let you see it, but just say, hey, I attended this class and this person told me, sorry about that, that you need to have all these powers in there. So asking them if they can share that would be useful. And then selecting the agent for the power of attorney. It's important to pick someone that's trustworthy, that has the capacity, but not just the mental capacity, but also the circumstances. Selecting a child that has 4 children and they're all under the age of 6 and, isn't able to actually take on the load at that moment in her life or his life, may not be the best choice. So think about someone who can take it on at the time when you need it, and you can always change it later. Next. And then the other tool that you will need while someone has lost their capacity is their advanced healthcare directive. That's the tool we use in California. Other states may call it a durable power of attorney for medical decisions, or some states have what are called living wills. In California, we have the advanced healthcare directive, which combines those two tools into one. It says who's going to make your day-to-day healthcare decisions if you're alive but not able to make those decisions. And it can be everything from blood draws, x-rays, CAT scans, surgeries, treatment plans, all the way up to end of life, in-home care, hospice care, long-term care, whether or not you want organ donation or not, if you do want your life prolonged or not. There's so many things that can go into that advanced healthcare directive depending upon faith beliefs or cultural traditions, but it's good to get all of that in writing so that way your loved ones know who's in charge of the healthcare decisions and what it is that you want to happen if something happens. Next. Again, talking about that faith-based or cultural traditions, you want to make sure that those treatment preferences are in there and addressed clearly, so there's no question about what you want as far as life-sustaining treatments. Resuscitation or DNR, that's one of the things that some people like to put in their advanced healthcare directives. There's a million what ifs that could happen. And so generally I don't like to put in if this, then this, because there's just so much. That's why you pick an agent that you trust who will make the best decisions for you based upon the general outline of what your treatment preferences are and your end of life wishes. Next. So what else should you look for or make sure your loved ones have as part of their estate plan? Their estate plan is to make sure they're providing for a spouse or children, adult or minor, making sure they're organized and that they have people in place to care for them and provide for them with the tools they've created, and avoiding the government and the costs that come along with perhaps probate or other costs that could arise with not having an estate plan in place. One of the tools that are used nationwide is called a will, and every state is different. California probably is the worst when it comes to probate court. I know a lot of other states have had loved ones that have had parents or so forth that have passed in Colorado, New York, Maine, Texas, Florida, and it didn't take as long to get through the court system as it does in California. And a will guarantees that you're going to go through the probate court system because it can only be processed by the supervision of a judge. And so in California, a will isn't really the best tool for planning. But in other states, it might be just fine because probate can take just 6 months. And that may seem like a long time, but it's not, when in California, it can take 1.5 years or 2 years, maybe more. So 6 months isn't so bad if all that's needed is a will. It says who's in charge, it says who gets whatever's left, and it specifies who will care and take care of everything after someone's passed away. Next. The will, again, will detail out the distribution of the assets, who's going to be in charge. That's called an executor. It's something that you will want to review and update. Life will change. You might decide, today in 2023, this is a great person to be my executor. 10 years from now, maybe they don't have capacity themselves, or maybe they've moved away and it just doesn't make sense logistically for that person to be your executor. So keep in the back of your mind that every 3 to 4 years, you should look at your tools and make sure they're still current. Next. The other tool that we absolutely use in California is called a trust. Many other states do as well, but not as frequent perhaps as California. There are different kinds of trusts. There are irrevocable trusts, there are revocable trusts, and there are testamentary trusts. A testamentary trust is something that's created through the will, and then the court supervises that. A revocable trust is something that you create now while you're alive and well. And then an irrevocable trust could be something that you create now if you're trying to use it for other purposes like estate tax protection, asset protection. Some attorneys use them for Medicaid planning. But generally, a revocable trust is your foundation of your planning. That's like a bucket. You carry it through life and you're in charge of it, and you put all your assets inside of there that should go into the bucket, and make sure that as life changes, things go out, new things come in. And that's the tool we use to make sure we're avoiding probate in the court system in California. Next. Inside of that trust, of course, you're going to designate beneficiaries. I like using the trust for bank account, listing it as the owner for bank accounts, because inside of a trust, you can have many layers of beneficiary. But some people will just have what are called payable on death beneficiary designations at bank accounts. That's fine. In some states that will work just famously, but in California, it may not, because they're only allowed one layer of designation, and that's why the trust tends to be a better designation for a payable on death beneficiary. You also want to make sure that the beneficiaries are designated for retirement accounts. You want a primary and a secondary, just in case, if you list your spouse as primary and you two have a common car accident, you want to make sure there's a backup. So those retirement accounts aren't going through the probate court system. And the same with life insurance. You want to make sure that you have beneficiaries designated primary and secondary. Again, if you're with the person who's the primary and you both pass, then we want to make sure there's a secondary beneficiary, so there's no probate of that death benefit from the life insurance. There are, of course, with retirement accounts, loads of tax questions, tax implications, depending upon the beneficiary designation. So we're not going to talk about like that tonight. That's not what you signed up for at, 6 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, depending on where you're at. But if you have questions about taxes, just go ahead and, shoot me an email afterwards and we can talk about it. And then, of course, keeping in mind that beneficiaries, whatever you designated, that goes. So if there's a divorce, that beneficiary still stands. You have to change it. You have to keep it updated. Okay. Next. Medicaid planning. I said to Jennie and Erin before we got started that I'm not a huge fan of Medicaid planning. Medicaid is the state federal run program that covers healthcare services for seniors, but also for, of course, minors or individuals that have special needs or are differently abled. It is absolutely a necessary system. However, when you are older in California, it's called Medi-Cal. There are fewer and fewer doctors accepting Medi-Cal by the day because they're not getting paid. They don't get paid at the same rate as they get paid by private insurance or by private pay. And there are fewer and fewer long-term care facilities, hospice care facilities that accept Medi-Cal as well. So in many other states, I am sure Medicaid planning is a wonderful opportunity to plan and to provide for your loved one. In California, you want to make sure you're having a good conversation with an attorney who's not just taking your money, because there are Medicaid, Medi-Cal planning attorneys in California, and they'll charge $10,000, $15,000 for this trust that doesn't even end up working. So you got to be careful about that in California specific. The eligibility requirements for Medi-Cal are constantly changing as of late in California. You used to only be able to exempt your primary home and $2,000 a month in income and up to $1,500 in like pre-purchase burial insurance, things like that were exempt. That's changed, and now you can have over $150,000 in assets. So there are pros and cons with the Medicaid system in California. It just, at the end of the day, what kind of care do you want for your loved ones? Do you want, them to see the doctors that they knew and that knew them? Or do you want to shift to someone who's not really interested in care because they're not getting paid the best? So there's a lot to weigh in that comes back to emotions and what's best for mom or dad. Next. Legal capacity. This is something that, we see. You can see, as Erin said, you can start to see the signs. And as she said, they don't always go in the same order, if it's physical, cognitive, emotional, or psychological, but you can start to see it. And depending upon how your loved one's estate planning tools are drafted, You could have it that the legal capacity is determined by one physician. It could be determined by two physicians. It could be determined by a disability panel, which could be your loved ones. Maybe it's just your spouse and a doctor, or maybe it's your kids and your doctor. It just depends upon what kind of tools were prepared for your loved one, but look for that. If there isn't any language on how to assess someone's legal capacity, you can reach out to neurologists or neuropsychologists and PhD doctors that do assessments. They're good about making that actual assessment. I think on the next slide, Jennie, it talks about those. Yeah. So the different methods for assessing that mental capacity could be a comprehensive medical evaluation by the healthcare, doing the neuropsychological testing, which I know of a fabulous woman in Marin County who it's great because she does a great battery of tests to ensure that someone has capacity, which then ties to the second part of the slide of avoiding legal disputes. Having that not biased person, not mom's primary care provider signing a letter saying, yep, she's a fragile elder and she doesn't have capacity, is a great tool, because then whether it's 2 kids or 7 kids, it's not, well, you took her to the doctor and you got the letter signed by that doctor. It's, nope, we hired a neuropsychologist, someone completely separate who did a full assessment. This was her decision, not mine, not me taking mom in, not me taking dad in and getting that capacity assessment. It's good to do that. If your mom or dad or loved one don't have their advanced healthcare directive in place or don't have a power of attorney, there are just the other court process to go through, which is the guardianship or conservatorship. And again, it depends what state you're in, what that's called. In California, it's called a conservatorship. If you're an adult, it's a guardianship. If you're a minor, in many states, like my family's back in the Midwest, they're called guardianships. But it's the court appointing someone to make your day-to-day healthcare decisions or your day-to-day financial decisions. There's a lot of cost involved in that. That's why I tell all my clients we got to get their healthcare directive and power of attorney in place, because in California alone, $10,000 just to set up a conservatorship. And I don't practice that area of law, but that's what it costs. Court fees, investigator fees, attorney fees. An attorney gets appointed for your loved one as well, all their fees. It just gets really expensive. And all the mom or dad or your loved one needed was that advanced healthcare directive or power of attorney to avoid that. So the estate planning attorney ends up playing a pretty important role by making sure that all of these things are in place, that the tools are comprehensive, bringing in the appropriate person if necessary to assess the mental capacity, customizing the estate planning documents to your loved one's needs, to your needs. So it's not just a one size fits all form document that may not work for you. And then sometimes when I do the administration or someone's lost capacity, I spend a lot of time as a counselor. The irony of an attorney being a counselor, it really can become that, where we're working through the emotions and we're working through the relationships and everything that Erin said, and the steps she takes the clients through. Some of us attorneys are willing to do that. And my training, I worked in hospitals prior to going into law, so I'm fully versed in all of that language and understanding the emotions and relationships of it. Next. That's it for me.
Big. Well, thank you so much. And then we'd love to answer any questions. So we'll open the floor and you can just hop on off mute if you have any additional questions. And if you want to get a hold of Emily, this is her email address and her website, emily@wiroweklaw.com and wiroweklaw.com. And then if you want to get a hold of Erin and need some support and guiding through your caregiving journey or just getting everything in place as well too. She has a whole coaching program around that. You can schedule a call here or just reach out to us and we'll connect you. And then she's on Instagram at NextGen Caregivers. And then if you have any real estate related goals or know of people who might have inherited a property or just want to be able to prepare to be able to guide a family member, our team is here to help as well too. Okay. And then our next class, next master class is on real estate investing. It's what 5 rules you need to ensure that you don't lose money in real estate. So that will be November 15th. And let me know if you're interested in that. It's on zencoastuniversity.com on the registration page. Okay. Go ahead.
I think Sue has a question.
Hi, Sue. You have a question. You might have to unmute yourself.
Hi there. I just wanted to say thank you. It was a very well organized presentation, super helpful.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And we know you've cared for mom, 95 years old. So there's a lot of information to make sure everything's in order.
Well, and I think the presentation did a great job of showing how multidimensional that is and offering the resources for the ones that might not come naturally to you. Very super impressed.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Becky, and thank you, Janae, in the chat as well too. Dave?
Oh, I was just going to say thank you. I appreciate all of this. I don't have any parents or in-laws left to worry about, but this gives some good insight to what we should prepare for our own children as we get a little older and for what they're going to have to look for. So, so thank you. I appreciate you putting this together and I appreciate the time that y'all put in for it.
Yeah, definitely start the conversations early. And so I know it's definitely a tough conversation, but Erin, I guess how did you have that conversation or how would you be able to navigate, especially with your siblings and figure out
Yeah, it was one of the things, I'm a little forceful. And so it was literally I looked up a conversation guide online and I brought us all to the kitchen table and I said, hey guys, we're gonna have a really hard conversation. And it was really funny because my sister was like, do we really need to talk about their funerals and talk about all these things? And I was like, yes, because I don't want to fight with you when this happens. And I said that and she was like, okay. And so, and it was really interesting because both of my parents were really already showing signs of illness. And so I think it was already on their mind. And I think that they were grateful that I took the lead and had that conversation because I don't think that they felt brave enough to have that conversation themselves and to have that conversation because it made it too real for them to bring it to the table. And I wish I would have had it when my mom was more, she was already she hadn't had a diagnosis yet. So luckily we got everything before the diagnosis. And so cause conservatorship is really hard to get. It's especially if they have some sort of dementia going on, they can fight it. And it's a whole thing. So, but yeah, so it's honestly, just, I hate to say, just do it. That's such a thing, but it's enrolling people in what you're doing. And it's admitting up front how scary this is and how hard of a conversation this is. Put the emotions on the table, put the hard thing on the table, be upfront with how hard it is and be willing. There was times where my sister had to walk away because she was frustrated or she was angry or my mom had to walk away and cry and and so we allowed for that process to happen while we were going through it. And there was no judgment. I think we have to not judge how other people are grieving. And so if they're pushing it off or whatever, we have to hold space for them in that and understand that just because their grief looks different than ours doesn't make it any less valid.
If I might add, you made an excellent point, which led me to think it's easier to have that conversation before people are actually sick and facing death. It's so difficult to have with a 90-year-old, I can't even tell you.
Yeah.
But if
Okay.
you have it with someone who's in their 60s or 70s, it's so much less personal. It's more about business and planning their life, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I tell everyone I talk to and everyone I teach, I say, use the workshop you're attending, use your meeting with your attorney as the impetus to start the conversation with your loved one. Say, I learned this, I heard this. Let's talk about it. As I tell all my clients who are younger who have aging parents, you know, they may not want to talk about it, but you need to say, hey, look, yeah, the planning's about you, but it's for me. It's for me and my siblings. Like, how do we protect us? And I know you love us. I know you've cared for us our whole lives. Continue to do that and get organized with your estate plan. So that way you can, you know, allow us to continue to be siblings and not be little kids again in the sandbox throwing sand at each other because we're upset and we're having our emotions and we can't communicate anymore because we don't know who's in charge and we don't know who's doing what. So however you need to start that conversation, absolutely do it.
I would say it's never too early to start. Like Erin, you were in your early 30s, and a lot of people like are thinking, oh, I don't need to worry about this until I'm like 50 or 60 or something. But just starting it early. Something that I do with Calvin, we have time blocked on Sunday evening, a family boardroom. That's where we talk about finances, we talk about planning and future and everything, and any serious conversations, it's brought to the table. So it might be a little bit tough, but maybe starting with your family whenever you have it, like once a quarter, at least starting it somewhere, or at least once a year to bring up, hey, how is the family dynamic? So, and then having an agenda as well too, of like, these are the topics that we'll talk about. I know it's going to be a bit tough, but we'll go have fun afterwards. And we just want to make sure that it doesn't break our relationship. We've worked with a lot of families who have inherited property, and especially with multiple siblings, and especially when they have like 2, 3, 4 siblings, and some of them, all of them, no one is ever on the same page about what this to do with mom and dad's house. If there's usually more than 2 siblings, one of them is usually staying in the house and wants to keep the house and live there for free, while another family member is paying for the sibling to live for free. So being able to handle all of those dynamics up front and figuring that out and setting things into place.
Yeah. And the only last thing that I would add, and I think you alluded to this, Jennie, is just like doing this for yourself, even if you're in your 30s, like get your plan, because, you know, this is something that I tell people all the time. Like if something happened to you and someone needed to step into your life today to live your life, to pay your bills, to do the things, could they? And if the answer is no, then there's some things that we have to get into place to make sure that that can happen.
Yeah, I think I set up my trust at 27 or 28 years old with Emily. Got my life insurance in order when I was like 19 years old. So, and still always adding on to it, always revisiting it every single year. So, putting that on the calendar, just do a recurring every 3 years on your calendar so you remember. A tip Ashley had for me is like tie, let's say like daylight savings time every year to something that you're going to do, like changing your air filters at your house, or about like re-talking about your plans, because especially if you're gaining an hour back like we just did, it's like you have that hour to have that conversation.
I was sleeping, Jennie.
You got an hour back somewhere. Great. Ray, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Erin and Emily, is wonderful. So I had a quick question around the retirement accounts. I think you mentioned, Emily, that those should be outside of the living trust. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was just kind of curious. So is it kind of fair to say like retirement accounts and bank accounts typically have those kind of like I think you called it like pay on death or something, and so you can leave those out and everything else should probably go into the living trust? Is that
retirement accounts stay out of the trust. Everything else goes into the trust, including your bank accounts.
Okay, got it.
But retirement accounts for many, many tax reasons. That's why they stay out of the trust.
Okay, and then like,
Life insurance.
Life insurance goes into the trust. Investment accounts, real estate, businesses, personal property, your cars, your art, your wine, your bobbleheads, whatever it is that you have. All
okay,
of that goes in.
and so even though they're in the trust, like you still kind of see like the step up in basis, right? When it's inherited.
Yeah.
Okay.
A trust helps ensure that there's a step up in basis between spouses if you live in a community property state, and then between parents to children, again at the federal level, but also at the state level for those who have that. And that allows you to avoid that capital gains taxes. Again, sorry guys,
Yeah.
capital gains tax that happens upon death.
Okay, great. Thanks, Emily. Yeah.
Yeah.
You. Then just a quick thing on stepped up basis, what regarding real estate. So some people, you might want to figure out like when to sell, like before or afterwards, but what that means is the value of the property would be, let's say if mom and dad bought the property at $100,000, it's now worth $1.1 million. There is $1 million gain, but there's a stepped up basis if mom and dad have passed away, and then the value won't get taxed. But sometimes if you sell before they passed away, there might be a big gain, capital gains tax. So that's where putting it into place and knowing who to facilitate afterwards. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Erin and Emily. And this was very insightful. I learned a lot as well, too. And if you all have any other topics you want us to go over, let us know. And we will see you at the next masterclass.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hi, guys. Thank you.
You, everyone.